Hi, everybody. It's Friday, and I am just relaxing before I have to go back to work tonight. I had posted a review of Paperbacks from Hell, and I want to apologize because during one comment about one of the books, I commented about the character, and I mockingly acted the way that the character is written. And I realized later that it seemed like I was mocking a person with a disability, which was not my intent to do. So I do apologize for that. So that's why I took down my last review, in case you were wondering. So I'm going to leave that comment out of my review today. And I'm going to go back to revisit Paperbacks from Hell, which, by the way, is an absolute treat to read. 5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. And if you are a fan of paperbacks, horror paperbacks from the 70s, 80s, and even into the early 90s, you will absolutely love Paperbacks from Hell. It was such a fun read. So it's written by Grady Hendrix, who is an American writer of horror. He's a screenwriter, he's a journalist. And that's the first thing that really does stand out is how meticulously researched the book was. It's got, the last 70% of the book is text, and then the other 30% is the footnotes and the bibliography and the lists of notable publishers and authors and artists. And you can tell it was very much a labor of love as well. Not just that he was, well researched, but also very just totally appreciates what he's writing about. And so it was tremendous fun reading the book because as I said before, when I was a kid, in my, probably early teens, my mother had this friend, Shirley, who would show up probably about once every 3 or 4 weeks with a plastic shopping bag full of paperbacks. And a lot of the time they were romance, but a lot of the time they were also these terrible, terrible, ridiculous horror novels. And so a lot of the books that I recognized from Paperbacks from Hell, these are books that were on my shelf as a kid. There's just such a wonderful haze of nostalgia running through the whole book. And my favorite section, I just want to share my favorite section is the skeleton covers. I think that's some kind of swami. That's a lady with a knife. And he goes on to showcase some of the more ridiculous. This book here, neighbor actually had a copy of it. I don't think I ever read it though, and I reviewed The Girl Next Door in another video, and yeah, that cover, nothing to do with the text, nothing at all. So and then Carrying Comfort, Dan Simmons. My mother had that book as well. I seem to recall starting it, but never actually finishing it. So anyway, yeah, highly recommend it if you're a fan of paperback horror from the 70s and 80s. I also found myself, as I was reading, frantically adding stuff to my wish list, but so many of these books aren't in print anymore. However, for Garb August, and that's another reason that I read the book, was to try to find some hints about books to read for Garb August. Oh, I located The Little People. Oh my goodness. I I am both incredibly trepidatious and horrified to read it, but excited as a kid on Christmas. I cannot wait to read this ridiculous book. And apparently The Little People was the book that kind of started Grady Hendrix's journey into reviewing some of these ridiculous paperbacks. So the book is John Christopher's The Little People. And apparently, unfortunately, it no longer has this cover. A little bit sad about it. It's got a much more generic cover now. But look at that. And yes, the book does apparently feature little Nazi leprechauns with that fight rats with bullwhips. I mean, so you can definitely look forward to my review of that for Garb August. And yes, I am inordinately excited about it. So again, Paperbacks from Hell, 5 out of 5, Grady Hendrix. The other book that I'm going to review today is called Hereafter by Sean Costello. Now there's a look at the cover. And as you can maybe glean from the cover, it's probably more of a thriller, twisty mystery kind of story than it is a horror novel. Although Sean Costello does write horror. Excuse me. He's based in Sudbury, Ontario, so he's a Canadian author, and he is an anesthesiologist by trade. So that, write what you know being one of the guidelines to writing. His main character is Dr. Peter Croft. I had to look up the name, I couldn't remember. And how do I explain this? Okay, so there's spoilers ahead. I'm gonna give it 4.5 out of 5 stars. It was a pretty twisty mystery. So the story is about this guy named Peter, and very first page, his son passes away from leukemia. That's not a spoiler. His son's dead the whole time. And Dr. Croft he's obviously very distraught, so he injects himself with enough dope to die right beside. And he wakes up in this dark room, and his son is terrified, and somebody comes in and has just taken his son when Dr. Croft comes back. His friend Lisa brings him back, and he's furious because he didn't want to come back. Now, and it's not because he wanted to die or kill himself, but because he wanted to, just stay with his son and protect him. So he spends the next month or so just drowning in grief because his wife died a few years before his son David did, and his son was all he had left, and now his son's gone too. So the first part of the book is very much it's a pretty intense study of grief. So he starts attending this book club group. That's the word I'm looking for. That's a word still, right? Group. Sorry. Yeah, you can tell my brain's been off. So he starts attending a mourning, grieving support group. And he meets this fellow named Roger, whose son was abducted 3 years ago. And he also meets some of the other people in the group who've lost their kids. And through various courses of events, he sees that there's a missing child poster, and then he sees the pictures of Roger's son, and he realizes that, hey, they look alike. There's something kind of weird going on here. So they start to put pieces together about what might have happened to these missing children, and Peter, for some reason, ends up lying down in Roger's son's room and realizes that this was the dark room where he saw his son get taken. And it wasn't David he saw get taken, it was Roger's son. So he starts to figure out that his own son, David, is trying to send him messages, trying to warn him about how to help these people. So I won't spoil the rest of the story for you, but it's interesting the way that it sets it up, because Dr. Croft, he's a man of science. He's an anesthesiologist. He's pragmatic. He believes what he sees and hears and feels. Like he just believes his 5 senses and not more. And there's a lady who's a psychic, and he doesn't really believe what she has to say. But at the same time, what he saw maybe opened up the possibility of anything, which I think is it's an interestingly pragmatic approach to anything that is deemed supernatural. I mean, most things do have, you know, an explanation, and it's not an otherworldly one. But again, sometimes things happen that you can't explain, as with the silliness that I've been dealing with for the last few years, or the last year and a half. And so it sort of goes back and forth. Maybe David has some unfinished business, and he can't move on until it's taken care of, is also the approach that the book takes. But most of it really is just coincidence and being able to kind of put pieces together, rather than David being the one that sort of leads them on this chase, right? So it turns into more of a thriller kind of. Another kid gets taken, and they're sort of racing against the clock to figure out who took him, excuse me, and what happened, and how to get him back before he's hurt or killed. Because, as they say, if they don't find them in the first 24 hours, usually they don't find them alive, unfortunately, with missing children. And I appreciated. I'll get, like I said, 4.5 out of 5 stars. The pacing of it was good. The look at what grief makes you do was, I think, really, and the way that, grief, it just sort of steals your soul for a while, and it takes a long time to kind of accept it and start to come back from it and try to live a normal life. I thought that was really interestingly handled. And I found the ending and the twist of the killer, I mean, when it got into more just a straight up trying to track down the killer, was where it got slightly less interesting than it had been up to that point. But most of the way, it really does keep up its pace. It keeps up its characters. And I liked that the setting was very distinctly Canadian. I mean, this is Sudbury. This is, Northern Ontario. This is, these are... The only thing that I found was weird was that they used miles and not kilometers, because most Canadians would probably measure distance. Actually, most Canadians would say it's about 5 hours, not however many kilometers. It's how far you are in time, not distance. That's how we measure our time. And then, you see stuff, you see the signs, and it's 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers, and so on. So I'm, 110 kilometers west of Toronto. That's where I am, right? Or I'm an hour from Toronto, right? You're not, we these miles things, these are foreign to us. So that's just a little bit of criticism there. But overall, yeah, it was an enjoyable read. I would definitely read a lot more of Sean Costello's work. And again, he's Canadian, fits in the theme of the month. So I hope you're reading lots of great horror. Have a great day.